Welcome to the Steady On podcast, where God's hard truth meets your hard story. I don't need to tell you that life gets hard. Life gets hard, really hard. But God's faithfulness is still active and alive in our hard. And these episodes are dedicated to remembering and claiming the promises of a faithful God. I'm your host, Angie Bauman. I'm a pastor and Bible teacher, founder of Steady On Ministries, and creator of the Step-by-Step Bible Study Method. But more than that, I'm a trauma and abuse survivor who carried a heavy weight of shame and worthlessness for many years. And I still struggle, but I live in much more freedom now because I know God through His Word and speak truth to the lies of the enemy with His Word. And that's what we do here. On Mondays, we take it in by studying the promises of God. And on Wednesdays, we live it out with teaching and testimony on the promises of God. So thank you for tuning in, my friend. You are the reason for this show. And I'm so very, very glad you are here. Let's get started. Hey, friend, I'm so glad you're here today for this episode with me and my guest, pastor and author Doug Brouwer. I had some reservation about interviewing Doug. How often do I say that about the men I interview on the show? I know. God continues to invite me to spend time with men, so I will remember that there are many, many kind men in the world who want to serve God and honor His daughters. Doug is one of those men. He offered only warmth and kindness and honesty, and I am delighted to share him with you today. Doug talks with humility and introspection about his early years in pastoral ministry and how ambition and drive got in the way of his desire to serve sacrificially and from an overflow of his connection with Jesus. He compares his chasing after meaningless things to King Solomon's writing in Ecclesiastes, where he declares that everything is vanity. In this online world of Christian communication, I can certainly relate to Doug's angst. You've heard me talk about that before, I know. There's so much emphasis on platform and popularity, and sometimes the calling and how it all began can get lost in the noise. Our verse for today hits home pretty hard. It's from the well-loved parable of the prodigal son, and it says in the NIV, "Not long after that, the younger son got together all he had, set off for a distant country, and there squandered his wealth in wild living." I hope today's conversation helps you consider where you might be squandering, but also helps you remember the Father's arms are always open wide. Let's listen in. Hello, Steady On community, and welcome into this Live It Out episode. I'm Angie Bauman, and with me today is Doug Brouwer. I think I should have asked you that before we pressed record. Is it Brouwer?
Yeah, correct. You got it.
Yay, good. Doug is an author and a pastor, and we're going to talk a little bit today about chasing after things. And Doug, I just welcome you and thank you so much for spending this time with us today.
Thank you for having me, Angie. I'm looking forward to it too.
Me too. So I know that you link the title of your most recent book, Chasing After Wind, which I think is just a beautiful title, with the book of Ecclesiastes, at least in part you do. I've heard you link those two things. And I'm wondering if you would talk to us just a little bit about that connection. What do you find in the book of Ecclesiastes that matches or inspires this work in Chasing After Wind?
So when I was growing up, devotions at the dinner table were the standard. After dinner, we read scripture and prayed. And of course, I thought that children all over the world were experiencing the same thing. Not true. And then when we went to my grandparents' house, we did the same thing. My grandfather was deaf, so he did not lead devotions, but my grandmother did. And then she would read from Ecclesiastes, of all the biblical books.
And vanity. It's all vanity.
Exactly. As a child, I did not know what to make of it, but I remembered it. And in older adulthood, I think I'm beginning to understand. I don't think my grandmother was depressed. She had a vibrant faith and a good spirit and so on, but I think that she did what I did at a certain point in life, do a kind of a life review. In other words, what does it amount to? Yeah. What did I spend my life doing? And she came up with that phrase, chasing after wind, and it became a perfect description of my own life review.
Do you think that she felt like she had spent time chasing after wind? Is that?
Yes, yeah. Obviously I do, but as a child, you don't know how to ask questions.
Right.
So all you can do is sit there and observe. And so I was paying attention as a child, and I'm guessing that's exactly where she was.
What did that look like for you in your life? What was chasing after wind for you?
You know, I I think I spent a lot of my life pursuing things that in the end didn't amount to much. It's not that ministry was wrong for me. In fact, I still feel called to it, and I still feel that overwhelming sense of call in my life. But I think that within ministry, there's a temptation to pursue some things that really are not of lasting value. And so before you ask me what would those be, I have to say that letting my ambition, for example, get in the way of my call was probably never a good idea. I wish I had seen that for what it was much earlier in my life.
Letting your ambition, I'm going to say that again, letting your ambition get in the way of your call. Is that what you said?
Right. What I've loved to do, what attracted me about ministry was telling people about God's grace. I just couldn't wait to do that because I had experienced it in my own life. And I also loved being with people. The deep relationships of ministry were so attractive to me. And of course, I continued to do those things. But in addition to them, I also began to measure my success by how many people were in my congregation on Sunday morning and how many cars were in the parking lot. And I think I just got, I know that I got caught up in that to an unhealthy extent.
Were you experiencing that kind of success in your ministry? More cars and more people?
I had a wonderful season of ministry,
Uh-huh.
which is what pastors like to call these things, in Wheaton, Illinois. And it seemed as though we could do no wrong there. The church grew and grew and grew. And interestingly enough, that's also the place in my ministry where I began to experience disillusionment. So at the point of greatest success, I also began to realize that this is not what I set out to do with my life.
I think that I've come to believe in this time of so many churches being so large. I'm not sure I believe this, but I'm going to say it out loud anyway.
Okay.
I think churches that get really large are going to get smaller again. I watch that over and over again. I'm not sure when I look at the early church, and I don't want to say that all big churches are bad because I don't believe that, or that all small churches are good. I don't believe that either, but I think there's a danger in large churches that most people can't handle.
You know, I've read that in North America, at least, up to 40% of the churchgoers are not going to go back after COVID.
Mm-hmm.
And I don't know if that's beginning to be true, but my sense is that it probably is. And it's true here in my current ministry setting as well, that the church in Europe has taken quite a hit. When I moved from North America to Europe, I moved from a large Presbyterian church to one that was a quarter of the size that I had previously served. And then this is still answering your previous question. I began to, recover what I had known earlier about what was satisfying in ministry. But it was in a much smaller context that I made that discovery.
Yeah, I think there's something that happens in those relationships that when we get into a larger situation, sometimes it's harder to stay engaged in what's really going on in people's lives and how they're experiencing God, because we get so caught up in programs or staff or these things that like sort of entangle us. And then we almost lose our first love. I don't want to, that's too trite, but I think sometimes we lose that connection of that original calling, like you said, to teach the people the grace, because we get so caught up in the machine of the church.
And, now I'm going to talk out of the other side of my mouth. Looking back, we had resources in those churches to do amazing ministry.
Excellent point. Yes.
Yeah,
yes.
I think back to the youth programs that we had, and I couldn't begin to match those now. But in those situations, we had the resources.
Yeah.
And I miss that.
Yeah, absolutely. Yeah, I hear that too. I do, which I think is why it gets really tricky. So how do you see, so I know that chasing after wind isn't just about pastors chasing after wind. So how do you see us doing that? How do you, as a culture or as a nation or as Christians?
So, right. I think I was mindful of that as I was writing the book, that I can't just write this for pastors. I think most people at a certain point in their lives engage in life review. So they ask themselves, is what I'm doing worthwhile? I'm putting a lot of hours into this. Does it amount to anything? I think that includes everybody in life, not just pastors. And what I wanted to do was to encourage that kind of thinking among a large group of people. In fact, I didn't think this years and years ago, but I now think that disillusionment at a spiritual level is a gift. And I wish I had recognized that early on. The spiritual writers I've been reading in recent years have made that plain. I avoided the disillusionment, buried it, tried to escape from it, and it was God's gift to me in hindsight to bring me back.
Why do you think that? I have a theory, but why do you think that is?
I think it was Bonhoeffer. He's the person I'm thinking about now. He said, if you become disillusioned, you have the opportunity to let go of what has no meaning, so that you can take hold of what does have meaning. I'm not doing justice to his statement, but that's essentially what he meant.
And so what did you find that does have meaning? Don't you like how I'm asking all these questions of you as follow-up that I didn't send you ahead of time? Thank you for rolling with it.
So one of the reasons I left the Presbyterian church, I mean, my credentials are still there. I'm still Presbyterian at heart, but I moved to a totally different ministry setting on the other side of the ocean. And I was very self-conscious about trying to recover my sense of call in a new context. And I think, and here I am again, I'm serving yet another church in this unusual kind of context. I think I am recovering what I missed out on for a number of years. I'm finding those authentic relationships. I'm finding my own voice again.
And what does it say? Your own voice.
Oh my. So one of the things that has given me satisfaction over the years is to prepare a message, a sermon.
Yeah.
And I won't go into the whole strategy there, but I find that to be a very satisfying process for me personally and spiritually. And I think I spent a lot of my life thinking about what other people would find satisfying in what I said, and I neglected what was going on inside me. I think preachers often preach for themselves.
Yes. As authors write for themselves and people who speak or whatever, I think often about some of the things that I've written or the things that I feel like are important to communicate about what I'm learning as I study the Word of God. And so often I'm speaking to myself years earlier, right? To try to oh, this is what I needed to know then. And I'm still learning now, and it comforts me here, and it comforts me from the brokenness that I had experienced in my earlier years.
You do sound like a fellow writer. I write to figure stuff out. I write sermons to figure stuff out, and I sort of forgot that was part of the deal.
Yeah.
Hey friend, I'm popping in to let you know that today's episode is brought to you by the Steady On email newsletter. Did you know every Friday I send encouragement and study resources to over 2,400 email inboxes? It's a joy and a privilege to do so, and if you're not receiving these gifts, I would love to get you signed up. Currently, I'm sending a new printable download to everyone who subscribes. It's 10 promises that help when I'm hurting, and on it you will find verses of scripture linked with promises of God that are go-tos for me when I'm struggling. And if you're already a part of the email community, you can still have the resource. You'll find the link in today's show notes. And now, back to the show.
So for the one that's listening right now, that's like, am I chasing after wind? Or I know I am. What might you say so that we can recognize when we are the vanity of vanities, if you will, besides reading Ecclesiastes maybe, but what are some ways we can recognize that in our own life and begin to get undisillusioned? I'm not sure that's a word, but I'll make it up for us for our purposes here.
It's very hard to engage in this process. Is very hard. And I would say to that person, stay with it. Live with the uncomfortable nature of the question for a while and let the answer come to you. I wrote the book soon after I retired, and then, I mean, COVID, it became a sort of COVID project too. So I had lots of time by myself, and allowing myself to enter into that dark place turned out to be very healing. And I know I'm not the first person ever to make that discovery.
Yeah. And I want to ask you about that too, because I think that's one of the temptations of chasing the vanity, chasing the wind, chasing after wind, as you say it, because when we stop, the vanity wind chasing moves us faster, I think. Like it promises a quicker result, I think, to the ache in our heart or to the longing in our heart, something like that, right? And sitting in that uncomfortable, it doesn't feel good.
I didn't make this connection, so it's not in the book, but it seems to me that chasing the wind is kind of like drugs and alcohol or whatever people use to numb the feelings, but it's not authentic. And as soon as we let it go or detox, just to continue the image, as soon as we were able to let go of it, I think we can recover what is authentic.
Yeah.
But it's not easy.
It's not easy, but I believe that it is our Christian, I think as pastors, Bible teachers, Christian communicators, whatever, I think one of the things that I bump up against the most that is then open a door to discouragement is that it's a tough sell what we're trying to do. I don't know how to say that. Like, this is not a quick, like allowing God to speak to your heart, to draw him close to you, to heal some of those places. That doesn't happen as fast as what a lot of other things that are being marketed or promised happens.
No, and it probably doesn't happen on your own. I mean, if I made it sound as though I sat at my keyboard and figured it out by myself, that's inaccurate too. It required some reading among spiritual writers, but it also requires deep conversation with people who don't who don't hold back. Dear friends who are able to say it like it is. I think if it hadn't been for friends who, I think they knew me well enough to know how I would respond, but they just let it rip. They told me what they thought about me and my life, and I needed to hear it.
Was there a circumstance, something at church, something in your life that was kind of like okay, no more, something has to change. I need to ask myself the hard questions.
Yeah, I do describe this in the book. So you're a Presbyterian and you know what it means to go to Presbytery meetings and sit with other pastors and elders and make decisions for the church. And I went to one particularly discouraging meeting, and it lasted all day. And it was, for me, it was rock bottom. Mm. And I don't think I had talked to anybody in my church about it, but I knew that I couldn't continue in this way. I had it up to here with the church, and by the way, I did recover a love for, I don't know about church meetings, but
I was going to say, you're a better no, I don't know. No, the church meetings, wow, that could be the draining thing. Yeah.
Right. But there is something to be said about having a constitution and having rules and order. And I get that more now than I did at that low moment of my life. But there was one of those moments where I thought, I just can't continue this way anymore.
Yeah. I'd love to know your thoughts kind of on that, between the balance, thoughts on the balance between like educating and credentialing pastors, the rules, the order, the meetings, all that stuff that you're talking about, that you're hinting about right there, and trusting God to work in and through imperfect people and leaders, right? So that to communicate his love and grace. Because I have all kinds of thoughts about this, but I would be really interested just in your thoughts about that balance for accountability, because I'm all for accountability, but sometimes the rules and the ladders to climb and the hierarchy and all that is like oppressive to the leadership and the lay people of the church. I think will you talk about that for a minute? The look on your face is like, I don't know if I want to talk about this or not.
That's exactly where I am. I'm so torn about this. On the one hand, I'm so proud of the way I was, I'm so proud of my pastoral formation. But the truth of the matter is, after 40 years, I mean, I'm 40 years beyond that time in my life, everything has changed, or nearly everything has changed. And so a whole new set of rules has come into place. And I'm just learning to live with things as they are. And I'm so I'm caught in the middle on this one. I'm trying to remember what was valuable, what really was valuable in my pastoral formation that probably ought to be brought forward. But yeah, I'm still in the thinking process.
Well, and I think that like when we go back to what we were talking about, like big church, small church, whatever, I see good about both things there too. Like you were saying, you know, with the small church, there's so much more doing life. There's connection. There's study together. There's sharing life together. In a large church, there's resources. There's resource for missions. There's resource for programming. There's resources for kids. You know, I mean, I get that both things have really positive, can have really positive ripple effects, if you will. And I think the same about the way the ministers are trained or the lay people are trained or even the hierarchy of the church or something like I see the reasons, especially like I see the good intentions of the reasons when it got started. And then I see how we get so far away from that sometimes and it becomes legalistic and we're dependent upon the rules and regulations. And I think some of it just goes down to this, we just are uncomfortable wrestling with the mystery of God. Like we're so like, I don't want to just let this go and see where he's taking us. I want to be able to control the narrative.
This probably happens in many different fields that people think the way I did it is the right way to do it, and we're unwilling to let go of it. I'll give you just a small example of this. There was a time early on when seminary students were discouraged from doing field education or ministry experience in their local congregation. So the thinking was you should go to a completely new setting and you know, well,
make your mistakes elsewhere.
Yes, right. With people who don't know you.
Right.
And I don't think that happens anymore, to be honest. I think most students, at least this is my observation, most students are doing their ministry formation in their home churches with people who know them. And, you know, I've just let go of my old expectation and I'm trying to do my best to shape and form a pastoral character. I love working with seminary students, always have. And if that's the way it's done now, I'm determined to give it my best shot.
Yeah. What is you talked about the church declining after COVID. You've talked about a couple of different things within the church and the way that we get caught up in wind chasing within our church and all that. If someone's listening and maybe they're struggling in their local church right now, or maybe they stopped going during COVID and they're wondering maybe why they were going before and they're not, you know, like I just talked to a lot of people that are like, I don't know about church right now.
Yeah.
Can you offer any advice or encouragement?
I think the best thing I can do is give my story on those first Sundays back. I remember the thrill, and usually when I'm happy, I cry. Some people cry over sad things, and I cry when I'm in the presence of beauty.
Yeah.
On those first Sundays back, I would sing a familiar hymn or a praise song, and the tears would begin to come. And there was something so wonderful to me about hearing other voices around me. I'm a better singer when there are people around me who are singing. I think I would encourage people to give that a try, to experience the incarnational quality of the church, be with those other people, at least give it a try.
Yeah. I have a dear friend who's she's gone back to church. She and her family have gone back to church since COVID. And she talks about how many people are missing now. And I thought it was so interesting. She's so wise. And her observation was, I keep going, even though it's a little bit hard to go, because I so badly need those people in my life. Like it does so much good for me to see those people come together, like you're talking about, Doug, and sing those songs together. And she's like, and I don't want to be missing from them either. And I thought that was such a wise and like giving, generous kind of thing to say, like, I don't know that I'm enjoying it right now. I don't know that I know what I'm doing right now, but I know that I need those people. And so I'm wondering if maybe they need me too. And so I'm going to keep going right now.
Wow, that is a generous
Isn't it?
perspective. Yeah, I
Yeah.
love that.
Yeah. Yeah. I was thinking also about a beautiful woman in the church that I serve as you were talking about the hymns, because she's been struggling with hearing loss for several years and resisting the idea of getting hearing aids, as many of our friends do, right? And just this last week, she wore her hearing aids. She has new hearing aids, and she wore them to church for the first time. And when we began singing, she began to weep. And she talked to me about it later. And she said, I didn't know the church still sounded like that. She's like, I could
Oh,
only hear, and I think about what you're saying too. And again, there's this idea of community. And I lift this up because I know people are struggling with church. I know church doesn't feel the same. I know people, I think COVID gave us this question of like, why do I go there? Like, because I've been going out of habit or something. And now it doesn't feel the same. Or maybe we got out of the habit, and dang, when we get out of the habit of something, sometimes it's really hard to go back, and there's so many more online options and all of these things. And I don't think any of these are terrible, except for I just go back to my friend's statement and be like, I think we need each other. I think we need each other.
a couple became members of my church a week or so ago. They're from Iowa, and they too talked about during COVID. They were live streaming their home church in Iowa, and they thought, well, this is pretty good. We can stay connected in this way. But when they made the connection to the church they joined here, that they realized what they were missing. It was sitting with other people, seeing them both before and after worship that made the difference in their lives. I hope that people,
Yeah.
I
Yeah.
hope that people are willing to give it a chance again.
Yeah. Yeah. Good. Hey, as you were writing this book and as you do ministry, I love to ask about favorite Bible verses or passages, and I'm sure you have a number of them, but what is one maybe that is a verse or two, whatever, that just kind of stands out to you as this is a go-to verse for me right now, especially as I'm dealing with this like chasing after wind issue?
I can't believe I'm going to go back here over the years. This story, it's not just one verse, but this story has been a transforming story in my life. It's from Luke's gospel, Jesus' parable of the brothers, really. Over the years, I've identified with the older brother, and I am to a certain extent like the older brother. But when that story had its transforming effect on my life, I realized that I was the younger brother, desperately in need of grace.
Mm.
And as the book describes, I was preaching the story when it finally got to me, when I finally realized that story was for me.
Yeah.
That God's love was bigger than I had ever imagined. And like the younger brother, I had rehearsed plenty of speeches. And then I just made this wonderful discovery that my speeches weren't needed, that God loved me.
Yeah.
I'll cry again thinking about it, but that story continues to be a transforming one in my life.
It's amazing. Thank you for sharing that. I think some translations in that, and it's the prodigal son story, often called the prodigal son story that Doug's talking about in Luke 15. But some translations use the word squander, I think. And I've set on that understanding of what it means, because I think for me anyway, it was really easy to see the younger son's squandering, right? Like that's pretty obvious. He goes and he wastes the money and he spends it on women and all and what it would say, wild living or whatever the translations say. I'm like, okay, that's squander. But the thing that really struck me a few years ago is the interchange between the older brother when he's mad and the father, when the father says to him, because he's mad, he's like, why are we doing all this? Why are we wasting all this? This is ridiculous. I've always been here, and the father looks at him and says, this will make me cry. Everything I have is yours. And I think about Jesus's promises of offering rest and joy and peace in abundance, right? And Jesus is saying sometimes into my life, sweetheart, everything I have is yours. There's a squandering in not receiving it as much as there's a squandering in like wasting. Both are wasteful, right?
Just come into the party.
Yeah. Yeah.
Just come inside.
I want you here too. I don't celebrate him more, but right now there's this thing that I'm doing that I'm celebrating him differently perhaps, but everything I have is yours.
Yeah, I'm glad you know that story well too. It's a wonderful one.
Yeah, it is. Obviously it hits me as well. Yeah, I love that. And I keep there are times that in my pride when I see it, like in my devotion for the day, or when it comes up in a lectionary commentary, anything like that, that I'm like, oh, I know this story. And I'm like, oh, Ange, read it again, right? Because there are times I'm like, I've never known that about that story before. Yeah.
Yeah, those are the good stories. Every time you come back to them, there's something new.
Something new. Yeah. This has been a fantastic discussion. I just appreciate your time so much. I'm wondering, before I let you go, I always like to ask, I love to share resources. Is there anything that you're reading right now, listening to, studying, watching, that's just bringing you joy or keeping you connected to God?
Well, I won't tell you.
I would bet you have a few things you're reading, but I'm just guessing. So
I was a philosophy major at Calvin College way back.
Oh my goodness!
In the dark ages, and so I thought no new philosophers would ever come along from Calvin. But I have made a discovery in the last few months of James K.A. Smith. He's got a wonderful little book about Saint Augustine of all people, and the title is "On the Road with Saint Augustine." All I can say is it's been a wonderful discovery in my life. I had no idea that someone could write an up-to-date account of Augustine's life, and James K.A. Smith certainly has.
I love that. Thank you for sharing that. I appreciate it. So again, thank you so much for just this time today, for chatting with me. Doug's latest book is Chasing After Wind, A Pastor's Life. And he can be found at dougsblog.substack.com. And I will link all of that in today's show notes. Anything else, anywhere else you'd like me to send the listeners to check more of your stuff out?
No, thank you, Angie. You've been very gracious.
Good. Well, thank you so much for being here. And thank you, friend, for listening. Until next time, peace. I loved chatting with Doug. I love chatting with other local church pastors who are dedicating to serving the people of God. And I love chatting with people who are honest about the struggles to surrender and lay down their expectations in the pursuit of using well the inheritance, the gifts of God. Our verse again is Luke 15:13. Hear it this time in the voice. A few days passed, and this younger son gathered all his wealth and set off on a journey to a distant land. Once there, he wasted everything he owned on wild living. Let's be people who know and use wisely the things we have been given. Thank you, Doug, for serving us today with your Live It Out story. It's an important reminder to be aware of what we're chasing and what we may be wasting in our pursuit. So next week, wow, I have something kind of different for you, but I think you're going to love it. Our Take It In verse will be John 12:46, that proclaims Jesus came into the world as light so that we don't have to stay in darkness. And my guest will be veteran David McGuire, who will share pieces of his journey with PTSD after serving in Iraq and how he depends on God's light to penetrate the darkness. If you haven't yet, I'd be so grateful if you would subscribe or follow the podcast on whatever directory you're using. It only takes a second, and it guarantees you'll see new episodes as soon as they drop. Thank you so much for listening. I pray wherever your day takes you, you're walking in the confident knowledge that you are a beloved, cherished child of God. Peace.